Welcome to Sleepy Classic Tales. Today we listen to a calm summary of a story about guilt, exclusion, and the question of when a person begins to see himself as a criminal. The Criminal from Lost Honor, written by Friedrich Schiller and published in 1786. The man whose story is told here grows up in modest circumstances. He is not a born criminal, not someone with dark inclinations. On the contrary, in his youth he is considered quiet, diligent, compliant. He tries to find his place in society without drawing attention, without causing offense. Yet this is precisely where his problem lies. He lives on the margins, not expelled, but not acknowledged either. His background, his status, his limited opportunities set narrow boundaries for him. He works, makes an effort, follows the rules, and remains invisible. Recognition comes rarely, respect even less. A first turning point arrives when he takes something that does not belong to him. No grand deed, no crime in the classic sense, rather a crossing of a boundary born of need, frustration, and a desire for significance. The act does not go unnoticed. Society's reaction is harsh. He is punished, publicly shamed, labeled. The quiet man becomes someone to be distrusted. From that moment on, every action of his is interpreted differently, no longer as a mistake, but as proof of a flawed character. He feels this change immediately. People avoid him. Glances shift. Words grow colder. He realizes that he can no longer return to the place he once occupied. The stain clings to him, regardless of how he behaves. And yet, he tries to conform. He keeps to himself, continues working, avoids conflict. But the more he adapts, the clearer it becomes that adaptation no longer matters. He is marked. In this situation, something within him begins to tilt, not out of malice, but out of disappointment. From the feeling that he is already lost. If no one believes him capable of being an honest man, why should he continue to strive? The thought is dangerous, and at the same time, seductive. The man begins to see himself through the eyes of others. And in that gaze, for the first time, the idea arises that he might fulfill the image they have formed of him. He still resists. He still hopes for a way out. But the story that begins here is not about a single act. It is about how a person is pushed step by step into a role until he finally accepts it. After the first conviction, the man's life changes fundamentally. The sentence is served, but its effect remains. Where he was once barely noticed, he is now closely watched. Every movement, every word seems registered. The trust that was never generously granted is now entirely gone. He seeks work but meets hesitation. His name is known, his story as well. No one says it openly, yet everyone is aware. Doors close before he can knock. What began as a mistake becomes a lasting judgment. This experience wounds him more deeply than the punishment itself. He begins to understand that correct behavior is no longer enough. Society has formed an image of him, and that image cannot simply be discarded. The more he strives, the clearer it becomes that his efforts no longer matter. Disappointment turns into resentment. He withdraws, avoids people, spends time alone. In this isolation, he begins to think about justice, about guilt, about why a single misstep should determine an entire life. His thoughts revolve around the loss of dignity and around the feeling of having nothing left to lose. A further conflict worsens his situation. He again comes into confrontation with authority. Not because he has done something major, but because he is mistrusted. Suspicion is enough. Once more he is controlled, once more observed. The experience confirms to him that his earlier behavior has irrevocably defined him. In that moment, an inner decision is made. If he is already regarded as a criminal, then he begins to behave as one is expected to behave. Not out of pleasure, but resignation. The thought of continuing to conform seems pointless. The rules no longer appear as protection but as instruments directed against him. His actions grow bolder, more reckless. Small transgressions lead to larger ones. What begins as defiance becomes habit, and with each act, the distance between him and the life he once wished to lead increases. At the same time, his view of himself changes. He stops justifying himself. He assumes the role assigned to him. In that acceptance lies a strange form of freedom, but also a dangerous clarity. The man recognizes that he is now on a path from which return is scarcely possible, not because he has become evil, but because he has ceased to believe in any other possibility. Over time, the man slips deeper into a life he once could not have imagined for himself. What began in defiance and resignation becomes a series of conscious decisions. He no longer lives within the order, but beside it, and soon against it. He joins others who have had similar experiences, men who also stand at the margins, who have little to lose and have learned to take what is denied to them. In this company, he finds something he long lacked: recognition. Not for compliance, but for determination. His deeds grow larger. Small thefts turn into deliberate robberies. Individual breaches of rules become a pattern. He moves with greater confidence, more resolve, almost professionally. The fear of being discovered gives way to a sense of control. He knows what he is doing, and why. At the same time, his view of society hardens. He no longer sees it as something he might belong to, but as an adversary. The laws that once were meant to protect him now appear arbitrary. The punishments not just, but useful to those already above. Authority reacts. They search for him, warn against him, speak his name as if he were a danger to all. Wanted notices appear, rumors spread. The man hears of this and feels not pride, but confirmation. At last, the world corresponds to the image it has drawn of him. Yet with growing notoriety comes increasing loneliness. Trust exists only within the group, and even there it is fragile. Everyone knows that loyalty lasts only as long as it is useful. The man senses that he is caught in a spiral that leaves little room for humanity. Another turning point arrives when an acquaintance from earlier days recognizes him, someone from the time when he still tried to lead a different life. That person's look strikes him more forcefully than any punishment, not from contempt, but from quiet disappointment. The moment haunts him. For the first time in a long while, he wonders whether he is truly free, or merely playing a role imposed upon him. Yet the question remains unanswered, for even doubt changes nothing about the reality in which he lives. The way back is blocked. The way forward leads deeper still. And so, he continues, not because he wants to, but because he sees no other path. With every further act, the pressure increases. The pursuit intensifies, the measures grow harsher. The man is no longer merely a name on a wanted notice, but a symbol. For authority, he stands for disorder, for loss of control, for everything that cannot be tolerated. They hunt him not only to stop him, but to make an example. He feels this hunt in every movement. The forests in which he hides offer protection and danger alike. Every sound can mean betrayal, every shadow a threat. Sleep becomes shallow, conversations brief. The group around him grows nervous, distrust spreads, and loyalty begins to crumble. In this tension, a boundary is crossed. During a confrontation, violence erupts that was not planned. A person dies, not through calculation, but through escalation. The man knows immediately that everything has changed. What had once felt like defiance against an unjust order is now irreversible. Death cannot be relativized. For the first time, he feels something long suppressed: guilt. Not abstract, not societal, but personal. The image of the dead man does not leave him. He tries to push it away, yet it returns, persistent and silent. At the same time, he knows there is no turning back. The act has finally defined him. For the world, he is no longer merely a lawbreaker, but a murderer. And perhaps, he thinks, he has indeed become one. The group disintegrates. Some turn away, others grow careless. The cohesion that once sustained him dissolves. He stands alone once more, this time not at society's margins, but entirely outside it. The pursuit sharpens. Authority is determined to capture him at any cost. Rewards are offered, soldiers dispatched, villages searched. His name is first whispered, then spoken aloud. Finally, feared. Amid this escalation, the man begins to understand that his story no longer belongs to him. It is told, embellished, used. He has become a figure, no longer a person. And in this awareness, a final insight forms: that not every act arises from free will, but every act carries responsibility. The realization comes late, perhaps too late. After the death that occurred in that confrontation, everything changes. The man carries the act with him, even as he tries to suppress it. It hangs over each step, over every decision he now makes. The freedom he once felt in lawlessness has vanished. He flees alone. The forests that once sheltered him now become a prison. Each day is marked by fear, each night by unrest. He hears sounds that may be imagined, yet remains alert because a single mistake could mean the end. His body is exhausted, his mind strained. In this solitude, he thinks back. He remembers the time when he had still hoped to belong to society. The effort to adapt, the desire to be respected. These memories are painful because they reveal how far he has moved away from that life, and how much that path consisted not only of his own decisions, but of persistent rejection. Yet this recognition brings no relief. He knows that he is now responsible for more than his own life. The death he caused cannot be explained away, cannot be excused. He understands that he is not merely a victim of circumstances, but also a perpetrator. The insight is bitter and clear. Authority draws nearer. Tracks are found, clues converge. People who once helped him turn away or are compelled to speak. He senses that his time is running short. He is weary of fleeing, weary of mistrust, weary of the constant struggle against a world that offers him no place. In a moment of clarity, he makes a decision. He will not continue living as hunted prey, not as symbol, not as story told by others. If his life is to end, then not in hiding, but openly. He decides to surrender, not in hope of mercy, but out of a desire to assume responsibility. The decision grants him a calm he has not felt in years. For the first time in a long while, he acts not from defiance, not from fear, but from insight. He knows punishment awaits him, perhaps death, yet he accepts the thought. The path he now takes is not a return. It is a path toward the end. But it is also the first step he determines himself again. The man reveals himself. Without resistance, without attempting to flee, when he is arrested, he appears exhausted, yet composed. The years of tension fall away, replaced by a peculiar calm. He knows this is the final chapter of his story. The interrogations begin. He is confronted with his deeds, with testimony, with evidence. He denies nothing. He does not try to excuse himself. He answers questions matter-of-factly, sometimes briefly, sometimes at greater length, if permitted. He explains what happened, not to justify himself, but to be understood. Yet understanding is not the aim of the proceedings. For authority, the case is clear. A criminal who has disturbed order for years. A man who has disregarded laws, threatened people, and finally, killed. The story is cast into fixed terms: guilt, danger, punishment. There is no space for nuance. The man feels this coldness. He recognizes that his inner development does not matter, that the reasons which shaped him are of no interest. Only the outcome counts. He is guilty, and therefore concluded. In quiet moments he reflects upon his life, not with self-pity, but with sober clarity. He sees the sequence of events that led him here: the first misstep, the public humiliation, the exclusion, the resignation. He understands that each step built upon the previous one. The insight is painful, yet unmistakable. He knows he bears responsibility. But he also knows he did not act alone. The society that condemned him early was part of the story, not as perpetrator, but as contributor. This awareness does not free him, but it makes the story larger than himself. The verdict is pronounced. The punishment is severe, final. He accepts it without protest. He knows protest would change nothing. What remains is the realization that his life has become an example. Not a moralizing one, but an uncomfortable one. For his story poses a question few wish to hear. When does guilt begin? And who truly bears it? The question remains unanswered as he is led away, and it will remain so when the final part of his story is told. The man awaits the end of his story with a calm that surprises. No rebellion, no attempt to evoke pity. He has accepted that his life will now be reduced to a few words: guilt, verdict, punishment. What came before no longer interests anyone. In his final days, he thinks often about honor, about the concept that once shaped his actions and that he believed he had lost long before he committed actual crimes. He realizes that his honor did not lie in society's recognition, but in the attempt to remain true to himself, and that this very attempt was repeatedly rejected. He wonders whether his path might have been avoided, whether a single different response, a moment of leniency, a sign of trust might have been enough to change everything. These questions remain unanswered. They are not part of the judgment pronounced upon him. When the end comes, it is unremarkable. No grand scene, no dramatic outburst. The man takes his final step composed. He knows he will be remembered as a criminal, and that this designation is simpler than the truth. For the truth is uncomfortable. It states that a person does not suddenly become a criminal, that exclusion, humiliation, and the loss of dignity leave marks, and that a society which allows no path back shares responsibility for what it produces. The story does not end with relief. It ends with a question that lingers: whether justice is sufficient when it lacks humanity, and whether lost honor can ever be regained. And with that, our story for today comes to an end. A story about guilt, attribution, and the question of when a person ceases to be more than his worst act. Perhaps you are now wondering, how strongly does this calm, short version differ from Schiller's sober, distanced original? When does guilt truly begin? With the act itself, or only where a person is permanently defined by it? And how typical of its time is this story, considering that the criminal from Lost Honor describes less a perpetrator than a society that offers no path back? We explore these and other questions in our accompanying book, Golden Pages, Volume 2. There we place the story in its historical context and show why Friedrich Schiller, with this text, continues to pose an uncomfortable yet necessary question. You will find the link in the description. And if you like, we will listen together again tomorrow. Good night.